from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we are going to conclude our three-part series entitled A Journey Through Asia, or we've often called it the Asian Album, and we have our two guests back from the last 2 weeks, and I know you viewers join with me in saying it has been a real exciting venture, and it will continue to be so today. We wish to complete the tour through India, and we will look at Nepal and Singapore and Hong Kong. In order to accomplish this goal, I'm so pleased to welcome my friends and colleagues back. First of all is Judy Sildy. She holds a baccalaureate degree from Whitworth College and a master's from UCLA and is a member of the history faculty at North Idaho College. Judy, it's a pleasure to have you back for this third program.
Thanks, Tony.
Also, it's so pleased to welcome Jim McLeod, who holds a baccalaureate from the University of Washington, Seattle, and a master's from Eastern Washington University, and he is with the English faculty at North Idaho College. And Jim, like Judy, I thank you so much for what you've done, and we look forward to today's program.
Thanks, Tony.
And as always, I'm very happy to have my two regular panelists with me, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Sheen, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And before we go into our regular questioning, I have good news for the viewers that Judy has brought along just a tiny sample of the hundreds and hundreds of slides they took on this trip. And for you who are new with us and did not see the other two programs, they took a sabbatical, an extended time in Asia. And Judy, we're going to ask you to introduce this third program, what I've indicated, the areas we're going to tour, and show our viewers the slides that you have brought today.
Certainly. Well, the final stages of our journey took us from northern India, the cities of Agra and Varanasi that are so famous, through the Himalayan kingdom of Nepal. While we were there, we got bad news and had to cut our trip short, so we came home via Bangkok, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Agra is filled with wonderful monuments of India's Mughal rulers, but none more so than the Taj Mahal, which, as everyone knows, is even more lovely than any photo can possibly show. The surrounding state of Uttar Pradesh is dotted with typical Indian villages such as this one, which we find as interesting as the grand monuments. We can't show photos of India without at least one cow shot. Jim and I decided the most typical site in India, which has, amazingly, 1/4 of the world's cattle population. So here we have it. We loved the magnificent 10th century temples at Khajuraho, among the finest in all India, set in quiet gardens. They once floated above sacred reflecting pools and must have been magnificent. The Ganga, Mother Ganges, is India's most sacred river, and its holy city of Varanasi, or Benares, may be the world's oldest city that's still inhabited. It's filled with temples, religious pilgrims, and holy men, such as this sadhu, meditating at dawn beside the sacred river. Our pre-dawn visit to these sacred places was one of our very most unforgettable experiences. Kingdom of Nepal is spectacular, as you can probably tell from this shot of the Kathmandu Valley in the Himalayan foothills. The ancient royal cities, such as Kathmandu and Bhaktapur, are filled with wonderfully exotic temples and palaces which look straight out of Lost Horizon or some fantasy. Nepal's Buddhist monuments are striking, with their stupas crowned by the all-seeing eyes of Buddha consciousness. These fluttering prayer flags carry wishes for boundless compassion toward all beings on the breezes. By any yardstick, Nepal is one of the world's poorest countries. 80% of its children are malnourished, 3/4 have parasitic infections, and the child mortality rate is one of the world's highest. The country has little decent drinking water and one doctor for every 21,000 people. Yet, as in India, we were repeatedly amazed by the people's quiet grace and good humor in the face of such conditions. For me, these happy little kids I played with in Kathmandu capture much of the reality of Nepal. Nepal's backcountry is stunning, such as this village in the Annapurna Valley near Pokhara. Villages are all very simple and have changed very, very little in the last 500 years, maybe more than that. 80% of Nepalis are small farmers. Jim and I found the Annapurna Valley intriguing in every way. Its natural beauty was absolutely stunning, and its traditional lifestyle was very interesting. Pokhara is surrounded by mountains, beautiful little villages filled with interesting villagers such as we saw here. We enjoyed walking out into the countryside a lot. They're very friendly. Jim and I are deeply concerned about the plight of many Tibetan refugees who have fled China's brutal occupation of their homeland, and we're very, very concerned about the survival of their culture as well as the people themselves. The biggest adventure of our whole time was probably our time in the Himalayas, first of all, here in the mountains. You can see again the beautiful reflections of the lakes near Pokhara. And then our visit to Tiger Tops, a wonderful wildlife camp in the lowlands of Nepal, where we went out on safaris every day, actually several of them, through the midst of highly endangered animals, such as the rare one-horned rhinos that you see here, or even more famously, the magnificent Bengal tiger, which are perilously close to extinction. One of our biggest thrills was spotting a leopard, which is even more elusive than a tiger, and that was pretty exciting for us. Transition from Nepal to Singapore could hardly have been more dramatic. This shot alone, I think, tells the story of Singapore's amazing prosperity. We're also crazy about Singapore's fantastic zoo, where not all the animals are in cages. I don't know which is the greater animal here. Our last stop was Hong Kong, which was as striking as ever. Its magnificent harbor with its legendary little star ferry surrounded by towering skyscrapers, such as the modern Bank of China building designed by the famous Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei. Hong Kong is rushing pell-mell into the future, but with sovereignty passing next year from the British to communist China, no one is clear quite what to expect next. Anyway, that was the end of our great adventure. Soon we were back in Idaho, mulling everything that we'd seen, and mulling a lot also our responses to American life, which seemed quite different to us from this new perspective. So it was a fantastic experience.
Judy, you were just eloquent in presenting that, and I know our viewers just love to see those excellent slides and great photography too, and we thank you for bringing that along, and we'll continue
it's our
with
pleasure.
our questioning from Janelle Berg.
One of the things that struck me as I was looking at the slides was the incredible beauty of these places, the towering mountaintops, and I'm sure you saw a lot of wildlife. What is the prognosis for wildlife, Jim, in India and Nepal?
Well, in India, it's not very good news, I'm afraid. In the last 50 years or so, the wildlife has been reduced to the point now where it's about 5 to 10% of what it once was. Let's take the tiger, for example. The tiger is, according to many estimates, going to be extinct within 10 years in India, except for zoos and this sort of thing. In Nepal, it may hang on by a slender thread in parks like Chitwan, but the population there is just barely viable, and whether or not it's going to last is another question. Much of this is due to the fact that the land is in such demand by people, and they need the land for grazing. They move their cattle into these areas. The tiger kills the cattle, then they kill the tiger because, of course, the cattle are their livelihood. So there's a constant competition in this regard. We're having a similar problem here in this area with grizzly bears, I think, and maybe wolves too. So we know something about this.
It's encouraging, though, to realize that the one-horned rhino that you saw, the one photo there in Nepal, was as recently as 20 years ago. They thought it had passed the point of recoverability, and it's thriving. In Chitwan now, and as a matter of fact, they have breeding populations which they've moved to other newly created national parks. So there are some success stories, and I think the real trick, which some countries such as Nepal have begun to discover, is ecotourism. If they can make that a viable economic activity for the country by attracting people such as ourselves to come in from the outside and bring tourist dollars, they can begin to see that these species are not competition, but in fact, can bring real advantages to the people. But it's anybody's guess what's going to be happening.
Steve Sheen.
Let's talk just a little bit about the situation of the people in northern India, and I'm thinking particularly Nepal. Judy, you said that 80% of the children are malnourished, 75 have infectious parasites. Are we doing anything as a country? Is the United States Foreign Aid Program visible in Nepal? Is other aid forthcoming from surrounding countries, Pakistan or India? Or are they too poor to help?
There's actually a lot of foreign aid activity in Nepal. Some of it is governmental foreign aid. A lot of it is activity by NGOs, non-governmental organizations, CARE, institutions like that. They're extremely active. I feel a little bit cynical about a lot of the foreign aid that's happening there, because my concern is that so much of it is misplaced. What we saw a great deal of, for example, was road building, highway building. Heaven knows Nepal has almost no highways. The east-west highway that we traveled from Kathmandu to Pokhara was an amazing experience in itself. But that, to me, is such a low level of need when you realize, as I think I mentioned, that very few Nepalese even have drinking water. That so many of the diseases that they suffer from could be avoided if they simply had sanitary water conditions. And what often happens is that the foreign aid is in the form of big infrastructure projects which are built by the host countries. So they, of course, make lots of money. I think sometimes it's a disguised form of beneficence to the construction companies and so on. And I would like to see a lot more public health things and educational aid and things like that. So if I were running the world, I'd do it a little differently, but I think people's intentions are good.
Jim, I finished a book not too long ago by Paul Thoreau, I think, The Great Railway Bazaar.
Right.
It's a travelogue, travels through mostly Asian countries. But just to follow up a little bit on Judy's response, I'm almost certain there was a section in there where they talk about roads being built in remote areas in northern India, and quite a bit of allegation that those things involve payoffs to local headmen or chieftains, and that very little of what is being done benefits ordinary people. Was that also your impression?
I would say so, yes, Steve. Of course, it's probably not a good idea to suggest that there's corruption in these situations, but I'm sure that some of that is playing a role. Lots of small grassroots kind of efforts, I think, really are needed there. We mentioned one last time, a man who's a chancellor, retired now at Mysore University, trying to start some programs to teach people skills that they can use to better their livelihood and so on. I suppose, I don't know if the Peace Corps has been in this area recently, but it seems to me like this might be an area that they ought to look at if they haven't been.
Jim, I'll start with you, and then Judy, I want her to respond too. Judy mentioned in her presentation the slides, and we read a lot about it, accounts in the news media about the conflict between China and Tibet. And Tibet's this tiny, tiny country overwhelmed by China, and the Tibetan refugees and what happens to them, and the Dalai Lama and others. Can you bring us up to date on what the situation is and what the prospects are?
Well, the situation is deplorable, and it's been a long-term one. In October 1950, the Chinese invaded Tibet. During the next 8-9 years, they were engaged in brutalizing the country. There have been forced sterilizations. People have been murdered. Their estimates are that 1.2 million people have been killed during this period. I have heard the figure, and I think this is accurate, that over 30,000 monasteries were destroyed by the Chinese. There's been an effort to stamp out Buddhism and their religion, their culture, their way of life, their language. And this is a situation that I think Judy would agree with this, that we both feel is very, very disheartening, and why more hasn't been done about this in terms of our policy, our foreign policy, I don't know. China is a difficult issue for our country, and this is not the only issue that we've had to deal with in that regard. The Dalai Lama currently, of course, is in exile in India. Many of the people fled Tibet in 1959 after a major revolution in the capital, and since then they have been trying to maintain their culture in whatever way they could. I noticed the other day in the paper that the Chinese have now picked the new Dalai Lama. They want their candidate.
Yeah, second to the Dalai Lama.
Well, their candidate for his position at some point, and which is very strange. One thing I should mention about this man: he won the Nobel Prize in 1989, and is a world figure, and is a man who I think commands a lot of respect in the East.
Judy, I know that you have interest in this too, and along with whatever your comments are, why has the world not given more attention to? Is it because of the isolation of Tibet, or because it's not in strategic?
Tibet is a small country. I think the United States feels we have no vital interests there. And I think the primary reason is just a real fear of offending China. The United States is understandably eager to maintain the best possible relations with China, but I think in this case China has clearly bullying is not a strong enough word, to describe China's behavior. And I personally feel the United States has a moral obligation to come forward and advocate the cause of the Tibetans much more forcefully than we've done. I certainly hope we'll see that happen.
Is the culture going to be just destroyed? I know that the politics is affecting the religion or and the philosophy.
To the Tibetans, nothing is more important than they maintain their culture. Jim and I visited a Tibetan really a whole Tibetan refugee community on the outskirts of Pokhara, and what we were most heartened to see was the school for Tibetan orphans, where they're teaching them their language, where the Tibetan Buddhist monastery is thriving as a part of the community. So they're certainly making every effort they can, but it's a very frightening situation, and one that I personally feel very, very strongly about.
Janelle Berg.
When we were viewing the slides just at the end, you said that when you came back to this country, it gave you a new perspective on your life here. Judy, can you tell us what you meant by that? And what are some of the things that you suddenly were aware of, the differences between
Sure,
here
well,
and there?
we're probably still discovering some of them. It's something Jim and I actually talk about rather often. Some of the things were wonderful rediscoveries for us. For example, we had to make a trip almost immediately south to Arizona to care for my father, who's been very ill. And as we drove through the great empty spaces of southern Utah and northern Arizona, we were just overwhelmed with the grandeur of the American landscape and the opportunities for solitude when you've come from, I cannot convey to you how crowded Asia is. We never felt alone, almost never, the entire 4 months we were there. So some of it was, as I say, a wonderful rediscovery of things like that. But Jim and I also found many parts of American life very, very hard to come back to. Just the overwhelming materialism of American life, not only that our lives are so crowded with things, but the sense of perpetual discontent that is so much a part of American life, that however much you have, you need more, you need bigger, you need newer, etc. And I think we're truly impoverishing ourselves in our headlong rush, to acquire so much. So that's one that I noticed. Another Jim and I have talked enormously about, because it was on the minds of so many people we talked with abroad, is the breakdown of the American family. I think I was telling some of you that after our last program, that we were almost never asked on this trip whether we had cars or homes or stereos, as we so often are on other trips abroad. Instead, what people asked is it true that young people go off and live by themselves after they're married? Is it true that people, that college students live on their own? And again, if we would say, yes, it's often true, they would say, but how are they a family? How then do people help each other? And many, many Indians and Nepalese sort of appalled by the individualism of American life. And of course, individualism is wonderful in some respects, but we were very struck by that. Certainly these are concerns we had before, but they become almost overwhelming when you look at them in perspective. And there were others as well. I'm sure Jim could add to the list. We've talked about lots of others.
Well, maybe this is just a matter of timing or coincidence, but of course the O.J. Simpson trial was very prominent upon our return, and I think that just underscored the endless fascination our country has with celebrities and entertainment that I find, very, I guess I'd say bankrupt in some ways. It seems as if these people have nothing else to do but to be endlessly fascinated with this sort of thing. And the violence is another factor too. Our culture, many people are so concerned about travel overseas because of violence or whatever, and it seemed to me that I never really felt any personal problem with this anywhere I was in Asia, and I think you've got more problem with this in our country than you do in areas like that, particularly because I think that so much of the entertainment these days is involved with violence and that effect. So those are just some of the things. I guess I would have to admit to this sort of sheepishly, but when you eat rice all the time, there's no fat content in it. And so when you get back, immediately you want to have pizza and things like this. So
Cheeseburgers.
There are cheeseburgers. So there are things like this that, that are some benefits that you don't think about at the time. Actually, I think that diet, though, the rice diet, is probably healthier for you in the long run. It is my case because I don't really need pizza and so on. But that's just one little small thing.
Every time I have a glass of cold water, I'm thankful that I live in America. You don't realize, it's such a simple blessing, but you don't realize what a large percentage of the world doesn't have good, clean, healthy drinking water, especially cold. So I enjoy that a lot.
Steve Sheen.
Janelle started her last series of questions by referring to your slideshow, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm going to do the same. Through this series, I've been struck by the size and the diversity of India, geographically, climatically. Could you just kind of briefly describe what northern India is like predominantly?
Well, extreme northern India is the Himalayas, and it's awesome. We had seen many photographs of the Himalayas, but nothing prepared us for the reality. There are over 50 mountains in India that are over 5 miles tall. They're just absolutely enormous walls of ice and snow, which are absolutely breathtaking, but that's one extreme. You go then into western India, and you have the Thar Desert, where we saw a few photos of that in our first program, which is the equal of the Sahara in terms of just great picturesque dunes of blowing sand and colorful tribesmen and so on. You go to extreme southern India, which we saw a bit of last week, and it is absolutely the lushest, most tropical environment one could possibly imagine. The overwhelming color of southern India is green, and such an intense green, I don't know that the language even has a word for it. And of course the variety of the people is fully a match for the variety of the landscape. So one of the things we certainly came to realize quickly is that our stereotypes of India were very impoverished indeed compared to the reality that we encountered when we went there.
I've got a couple of other quick questions based on those slides. Jim Judy said that the Taj Mahal is even more beautiful in person than it is in a picture. Is that possible?
Well, it is, Steve, and I think what you miss often is that because you're so far back in most of those shots from it, you don't see all of the beautiful, ornate, decorative designs, and unless you've got a good book that shows you some of those close-up photographs. Of course, a lot of it, too, has to do with whether you see it at sunset or sunrise, and the color of the marble captures the color of the sky, and so it changes. It depends on what time of day you see it, and it's often interesting to watch the various people that come through and see it for the first time, to see the look on their faces, because it's quite moving. We happened to see a Buddhist monk who apparently had never seen it before, standing and looking at this monument. And here's a Buddhist monk who probably, we assume he would probably be respectful of the Islamic people and their architecture and so on. But you could see that's not his faith, but he was visibly moved by this monument. It was so breathtaking. And I really would say that it's not an exaggeration that this monument is something that everybody should see.
And finally, if I may, I've heard people describe Singapore as incredibly modern, but rather sterile. Did you react to?
Yes, right on both counts. It's an amazing place. It is so prosperous. It's so upscale. You see no poverty. Everything is totally up to the minute, incredibly efficient. In a way, it's a storybook sort of a place, and yet it is also literally a police state where there are fines for chewing gum, for failure to flush a toilet, if you can imagine that. It's a hefty fine for offenses like that. The press is rigidly controlled, which I never like, and in fact is very sterile. We found Singaporean newspapers by far the least interesting newspapers we've seen anywhere in Asia. And I must confess that for me, again, the very thing that for so many people makes Singapore wonderful became very deadening, and that is the overwhelming materialism of the place. It's just a pell-mell pursuit of prosperity, and it's extraordinary the degree of prosperity they have achieved in just 50 years, the time since World War II. I don't think that there's a nation on earth that matches its economic growth, but I think many other things have suffered, including a sense of history and so on.
Judy, I've got the time. We have 2 minutes left, and I want you to tell the story about the elections and when you were in the car and Jim went into the polls and what happened to you.
Okay, well, yeah, I think Jim told part of that story in our first episode. We were traveling back through rural India and noticed that village elections were going on, and asked our driver to stop so that we could take a photo. He did one better than that. He spoke with a local official and beckoned at us to follow him toward the polls. I looked around and could see very quickly that there were no women around the polls. They were all gathered down the road, huddled together, chatting, etc. So I felt that it would be a real blunder for me as a woman, especially a Western woman, to go in there. And I told Jim and Bhawani, our driver, to go ahead. They were treated royally at the polls, but I would just have to say harassed in a fairly extreme form by men, villagers, who I like to think meant me no harm, but who began first of all opening the car doors and grabbing at me and then rocking the car, and I really became quite frightened. So it sort of epitomizes the best and worst.
I'm so sorry to interrupt,
that's all right.
but that's a really interesting story, and everything you've done in 3 weeks has been so outstanding. We thank you so much, and for the 3 50-minute videos we have in the library. We're grateful to you for all you've shared with us, and we'll have you back at some future date. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you found this most fascinating. They are such great travelers and share with us in such a great way. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, and we'll move to yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.